Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into one of the greatest financial debates of our time. I'm talking about real estate versus the stock market. To really visualize this, we're going to follow two identical guys. Let's call them Jake and Marcus. They're exactly the same age, live in the exact same city, both make $55,000 a year, and they both have exactly $50,000 sitting in savings. So they're at the exact same financial starting line. But they are about to make radically different choices with that 50 grand.
So it's the ultimate question, isn't it? Who walks away richer after 20 years? The landlord or the index fund investor? Jake buys a rental property while Marcus throws his money straight into index funds. And they both walk away from that initial decision totally convinced they made the smart play. But according to the math, well, they're actually both a little bit wrong. Because as we trace their 20-year journeys, you'll see that one of them completely forgot to count the hours and the other forgot to count the zeros.
Okay, let's dive right into this and look at day one. Jake takes his 50 grand and drops it as a 20% down payment on a $250,000 rental property, locking in a 30-year mortgage at 7% interest. Marcus, on the other hand, takes his $50,000 and drops it straight into a total stock market index fund, and he sets up an automatic contribution of $300 a month. Emotionally, the difference is just staggering. Think about it. Jake has a physical house, a tenant, keys in his pocket, and a really great story for his dinner parties. Marcus, he just has a boring brokerage confirmation email. But as we're going to see, feelings and math are two very different things.
Section 1. The first 3 years, the landlord illusion versus the boring brokerage.
So during these early years, Jake is feeling like an absolute investing genius, while Marcus feels like literally nothing is happening. Jake finds a tenant paying $1,800 a month. His mortgage is $1,330, so on paper, that's $470 a month in pure profit. Over the first 3 years, he collects an amazing $64,800 in rent, pays his mortgage, and is left with $16,920 in gross cash flow. I mean, it looks incredible on a napkin.
But we've got to look at the reality checklist. And this aggressively strips away that big, beautiful, gross number. Property taxes cost Jake $3,000 a year. Insurance is another $1,500 annually. Then, he had to fix a leaking roof for $2,800, replace a water heater for $1,200, and deal with a month of vacancy that cost him thousands in lost rent and cleaning fees. Oh, and because he's managing it himself to save that 8 to 10% property management fee, he is spending hundreds of uncompensated hours dealing with 2 a.m. phone calls about broken pipes and giving up his weekends for showings.
And that brings us to an absolutely crucial point. After all those real, unavoidable costs, Jake's actual net cash flow over those first 3 years is nowhere near 17 grand. It actually shrinks down to somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000. That whole landlord dream gets a lot smaller when you actually do the invisible math of property maintenance.
But hey, do not count Jake out just yet. Despite that really low cash flow, he is still building tremendous wealth through a little something called leverage. By putting down just $50,000, Jake controls a $250,000 asset. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. So as that property appreciates by just, say, 3 to 4% a year, his equity grows rapidly because it's based on the total value of the house, not just his down payment. He's literally building real wealth using the bank's money. Plus, he's utilizing massive tax benefits like depreciation and mortgage interest deductions to shield his gains.
Now, Marcus doesn't have leverage. He has compound interest. Over those exact same 3 years, Marcus's initial $50,000 plus his steady $300 monthly contributions quietly grows at a 10% average annual return. Now, this growth is pretty slow for the first 5 years, but it becomes absolutely astonishing for the next 15. His portfolio reaches about $76,000. And the key difference here? Marcus experienced 0 weekend emergencies, 0 broken pipes, and 0 hours of unpaid labor.
Let's move to section 2 and see how this builds. Year 10, the gap narrows.
This is the point where the math really starts accelerating, and the gap between our two investors gets incredibly interesting. Look at this. After a decade, their total wealth is shockingly close. Jake's property has appreciated, his mortgage has been paid down, and his total equity is sitting somewhere around $170,000 to $184,000. Marcus, purely through the magic of compound growth, where the gains on his gains are now generating way more wealth than his actual monthly contributions, is right behind him with a portfolio worth $165,000 to $180,000.
But you really have to look at the wildly different emotional and physical tolls it took to reach that matching net worth. Think about it. Jake has spent 10 years effectively working a part-time job. He's taken on massive debt, and he tied his entire investment to a single zip code. And Marcus? 0 hours of labor, 0 debt, and his wealth is diversified across literally thousands of companies. Jake had a lot of stress and his cash was tied up. Marcus had total peace of mind and freedom.
All right, Section 3, Year 20, the final verdict.
We've reached the climax of our timeline, and the conclusion is actually pretty surprising. After 2 entire decades, both investors end up in the exact same ballpark of total wealth. Jake's property value has grown to about $450,000 to $500,000, leaving him with an equity footprint of around $400,000 to $500,000. Marcus, assuming that consistent 10% average annual return, sees his portfolio grow to that exact same range, $420,000 to $460,000. They arrive at the exact same destination, they just took completely different roads to get there.
But there is a massive hidden variable here. If Marcus had simply increased his monthly contribution by just $200, making it $500 a month instead of $300, his 20-year portfolio would have absolutely exploded to between $550,000 and $600,000. That is the jaw-dropping multiplier effect of compounding. In real estate, trying to scale your returns usually means buying another entire house, which means taking on a whole new wave of work and debt. But in the stock market, you just change a number in a drop-down menu.
Section 4, the hidden truths, exposing the risks on both sides.
Now, to make sure we're looking at a completely balanced picture, let's start with the dark side of stocks. Because let's be real, it is not all sunshine and spreadsheets. The gut-wrenching reality of the stock market is brutal volatility. Imagine Marcus watching his portfolio drop 37% like it did in 2008, or 34% in a single month during 2020. That kind of drop induces panic selling, where retail investors lock in their losses. Plus, Marcus has virtually no cash flow right now. Dividends yield maybe 1.5 to 2%, and he has absolutely zero access to that incredibly powerful 5-to-1 leverage that Jake was using. And this brilliantly illustrates the flip side, the specific, mathematically proven scenarios where real estate definitively beats stocks. See, real estate wins big if you buy in a market where the rent-to-price ratio is 0.8% or higher. It wins if you use house hacking, living in one unit and renting out the others to bring your housing costs down to zero. It wins if you treat it like an actual business rather than just a casual side hustle. And it absolutely crushes it when you use advanced tax strategies like 1031 exchanges to defer capital gains and leveraged depreciation as a completely legal tax shelter.
So let's summarize the core differences side by side so you can see the holistic picture of effort versus reward. Jake's real estate path? It's basically a part-time job driven by leverage, aided by massive tax write-offs, but it's crippled by low liquidity and the constant risk of bad tenants. Marcus's stock market path? Entirely passive, driven by compound interest, highly liquid, but heavily exposed to severe emotional volatility.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway here. The real trap isn't real estate, and it isn't stocks. The real trap is picking either one based on a YouTube headline, a shiny clip, or something your buddy bragged about at a barbecue, without ever running the full numbers for your own specific situation. You absolutely have to account for those invisible hours and the invisible zeros.
And that leaves us with one final provocative question. We've just seen what happens when you pick one path over the other. But what happens to the math when you combine them? What if you own property and invest in the market at the exact same time? That is a whole new equation to run for yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this helps you build a clearer roadmap for your own financial journey.